Before her Angie Stone dropped a bombshell, naming the very artist she felt betrayed by, overlooked her, or disrespected her legacy, and trusts some names to sting. Stay tuned as we discuss why she hates these artists. Number 7. D'Angelo. If there's one name that cuts deeper than the rest in Angie Stone's life, it's D'Angelo, the neo-soul prodigy she helped build from the ground up, and the man who later became the father of her child. Their story wasn't just personal, it was musical, emotional, and ultimately tragic. Before the fame and the iconic untitled How Does It Feel music video that made women across the globe swoon, D'Angelo was a struggling artist, talented but raw. Angie Stone saw his potential early. At the time, she was already a seasoned musician, having sung in the pioneering rap trio The Sequence, and later built her credibility through collaborations and solo work. But when she met D'Angelo, she poured her soul into him, quite literally. Stone helped co-write much of his debut album like Brown Sugar, shaping not just the songs but the very sound that would define neo-soul. She was his mentor, his guide, and eventually his lover. They shared a home, they shared a child, but as D'Angelo's fame skyrocketed, so did the cracks in their relationship. In later interviews, Angie Stone never masked her disappointment. She claimed D'Angelo had changed, that the fame warped him into someone she no longer recognized. She watched him descend into alcohol and substance abuse, miss opportunities, and squander the momentum they had worked so hard to build. Perhaps most hurtful of all was the fact that he withdrew completely from fatherhood. Angie raised their son largely on her own. She admitted in a 2012 interview that she felt abandoned, not just emotionally, but musically. Here was an artist she had invested in, someone she nurtured, and when it was his turn to uplift her or even just acknowledge her contributions publicly, he stayed silent. Their professional split mirrored their personal one. After the release of Brown Sugar, D'Angelo moved on to other collaborators. Angie was left in the shadows, watching as her influence was repackaged and credited elsewhere. To the industry, D'Angelo was the mysterious genius, but to Angie Stone, he was a man who forgot his roots and forgot her. In interviews over the years, Stone remained careful with her words. She never called him evil, but she didn't hide her resentment. One of her most cutting quotes came in 2011. When she mentioned her first encounter with him, he was unaware of his own identity. He was a boy from the church. She infused him with flavor. She imparted soul to him. However, that is something you wouldn't recognize today. That sentence alone carried decades of hurt. It wasn't about bitterness for the sake of drama. It was about deep betrayal. Angie Stone didn't just feel rejected. She felt erased. D'Angelo, on his part, rarely mentioned her in interviews. Whether out of shame, denial, or an industry tactic to protect his mystique, he distanced himself entirely. There were no public apologies, no co-parenting harmony, just silence. By the time Angie neared the later stages of her life, she seemed more at peace, but there was always a sting when D'Angelo's name came up. To some, he was the tortured genius. To her, he was the man who took her love, her mentorship, her music, and gave her back a wound that never fully healed. So when Angie Stone finally spoke about the artist she regretted ever trusting, it made perfect sense that D'Angelo's name was the first to leave her lips. While many of Angie Stone's conflicts simmered quietly behind closed doors, her feud with Stacey Francis exploded in front of cameras, messy, unfiltered, and painful to watch. Number 6. Stacey Francis. Their clash on the reality show R&B Divas. Atlanta wasn't just a personality conflict, it was a full-blown war of generations, values, and survival in the music industry. When Angie Stone joined R&B Divas in 2013, fans were excited. Here was a legend, a woman with decades of history, talent, and dignity, stepping into a space where vulnerability, honesty, and maybe even healing were promised. But the moment Stacey Francis entered the room, those hopes started to crack. From their very first interaction, the tension was obvious. Stacey, known for her time on the X Factor USA and for her own controversial tabloid run-ins, came in with something to prove. She had a loud personality, an aggressive edge, and a need to assert her relevance. Angie, on the other hand, came with years of industry wisdom and a natural command of respect. The two were oil and water. What started as subtle jabs escalated into heated argument. Stacey accused accused Angie of being condescending, while Angie felt Stacey was disrespectful and reckless, both as a woman and as a professional. The core of their tension, however, lay in something deeper. Angie felt the show was exploiting drama at the expense of legacy. In multiple interviews after leaving the show, Stone didn't hold back. She claimed the producers were setting black women up to fight, and that certain castmates, namely Stacey, leaned into that chaos for attention. She described the experience as toxic and went so far as to say that the show quenched her spirit. The worst moment came during a film confrontation where Angie tried to speak calmly, but Stacey repeatedly interrupted and shouted over her. At one point, Stone, visibly shaken, simply got up and walked off the set. She had been through too much in her life and career to stoop to reality TV theatric. In later press appearances, Angie said that what bothered her most wasn't just Stacey's loudness, it was her lack of reverence for the women who paved the way. Angie mentioned in an interview that they originate from distinct backgrounds. She stated that she comes from legacy, Stacey comes from scandal, and she doesn't do scandals. That wasn't just shade, that was a closing argument. Behind the scenes, the fallout was even worse. Angie allegedly stopped speaking to producers. She skipped reunions, and not long after, she left the show altogether. Fans noticed how drained she looked in her final appearances, like a woman who had signed up for a celebration of R&B and ended up in a shouting match with people who barely respected the genre. For Stacey Francis, it may have just been another headline, but for Angie Stone, it was a betrayal of the culture she spent her whole life defending. So when Angie named the people who left a bad taste in her mouth, people she regretted ever engaging with, it was no surprise that Stacey Francis made the cut. Their feud didn't just bruise Angie's pride, it dimmed her light, if only for a moment. If D'Angelo was the heartbreak and Stacey Francis was the storm, then Alicia Keys was the silence, a kind of conflict that didn't involve shouting matches or headline-grabbing scandals, but instead simmered quietly beneath the surface of the music industry's glowing spotlight. Number 5. Alicia Keys. To the public, there was no feud between Angie Stone and Alicia Keys. No interviews where they dragged each other's names. No Twitter spats or tabloid wars. But behind Angie's graceful composure, there were strong feelings about how the industry had chosen to elevate some voices while marginalizing others. In the early 2000s, neo-soul and conscious R&B were evolving. Angie Stone, who had helped birth that very sound, both as a solo artist and through her work with D'Angelo and the Soulquarians, was releasing rich, emotional albums like Black Diamond and Mahogany Soul. Her voice was raw, textured, and filled with lived experience. Yet when it came to airplay, awards, and label backing, Stone was often overshadowed by younger, more polished artists. And that's where Alicia Keys entered the picture. When Keys debuted with Songs in a Minor in 2001, the industry lit up. She was marketed as a fresh, soulful prodigy, someone who could sing, write, and play classical piano. But for many veterans of the R&B and soul scene, there was something familiar about her arrival. Too familiar. Angie never publicly called Alicia out by name, but in several interviews around this time, she made clear her frustration with the industry's obsession with youth and image. She spoke about being sidelined in favor of pretty faces who had the machine behind them. While Alicia Keys was gracing magazine covers and collecting Grammys, Angie was fighting just to get proper label support. Despite critical acclaim, her albums were under-promoted, and many of her singles were buried on R&B charts rather than pushed to crossover success. What made it even more painful was that Stone had paid her dues. Long before Alicia even entered the spotlight, she had been part of the very first female rap group to sign a record deal. She had sung background music for Lenny Kravitz. She had helped write for others, lifted rising stars, and built bridges in the neo-soul community. So, watching a younger artist, one whom the industry conveniently branded as the new soul, get all the fanfare felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't personal against Alicia herself. It was what Alicia represented, an industry that had forgotten who made the foundation. And it didn't help that the two never collaborated, never crossed paths on record, never even acknowledged each other in interviews. That silence, mutual or strategic, only deepened the distance. Angie likely saw it for what it was, an intentional industry divide. She wasn't angry at Alicia Keys, the woman, but she resented the game that made it seem like Alicia had invented something Stone and others had been perfecting for decades. She resented the way her contribution was erased, while Alicia was elevated as the face of modern soul. So when Angie looked back at her career and named those she felt pushed her aside, maybe not out of hatred, but from hurt, Alicia Keys wasn't exempt. Not because she did anything overtly wrong, but because she stood on a platform that was built in part by women like Angie Stone and never once looked back. When Angie Stone signed with J Records, many believed it was the start of her long overdue mainstream breakthrough. Number 4. Clive Davis. After years of grinding, building a name in underground soul circles, and shaping the neo-soul genre alongside peers like D'Angelo and Questlove, Stone was finally being backed by a major label. And not just any label, but one overseen by Clive Davis, the legendary music executive who had built empires with Whitney Houston, Aretha Franklin, and Alicia Keys. But behind the scenes, the reality was far less glamorous. Stone's time at J Records would quickly become one of the most disillusioning chapters of her career, a period marked by frustration, creative restraints, and a growing sense that she was being treated as a second-class artist in a system designed to favor someone else. Her 2001 album Mahogany Soul was a critical success. It featured hits like Brotha and Wish I Didn't Miss You, both songs drenched in raw emotion and honest storytelling. But despite the momentum, Stone quickly noticed a troubling pattern. The label wasn't putting real weight behind her. Promotion was lukewarm, budgets were limited, media appearances were rare. Meanwhile, across the hall, Alicia Keys, also signed to J Records, was experiencing the full machine. Magazine covers, high-budget videos, national campaigns. The message was clear. Angie wasn't the label's priority, she was just there. A respected voice, sure, but not one they believed would move massive units or appeal to younger, image-obsessed markets. Stone would later say in interviews that she felt ignored and silenced. At one point, she accused the label of trying to box her in creatively, pushing her toward a more commercial sound she didn't identify with. She wanted to make soul music, the kind that comes from lived experience, not marketing algorithms. But J Records, she claimed, wanted hits. But perhaps the most painful part was the way she was made to feel invisible, even within her own roster. She was constantly compared to Alicia Keys, and felt that her artistry was being measured against someone 15 years her junior, with an entirely different lane and image. It wasn't just competition, she was erased. And Clive Davis? According to Stone, the music mogul barely acknowledged her, even as she turned in album after album of quality material. She once described the relationship as cold and one-sided, with little to no personal engagement. For someone who had mentored legends and once claimed to have a golden ear, Davis seemed remarkably tone-deaf to what Angie Stone was bringing to the table. Eventually, Stone parted ways with J Records, leaving behind a catalog that was beloved by fans but undervalued by the very machine that distributed it. She walked away disheartened, not because she hadn't worked hard, but because she'd learned the hard truth of the industry. Sometimes, talent isn't enough. Years later, she would still speak out about the injustice of it all, not bitterly, but with a wounded kind of clarity. The label never gave her the spotlight she earned, and the executives who could have changed that, people like Clive Davis, looked the other way. Number 3. Diamond Stone. Of all the conflicts in Angie Stone's life, none cut deeper or drew more public attention than the one with her own daughter, Diamond Stone. It wasn't a music industry beef. It wasn't a clash of egos between two artists. It was something far more personal. A tragic unraveling of mother and daughter, both struggling under the weight of pain, expectations, and unresolved hurt. It all came to a head in March 2015, when Angie Stone was arrested for allegedly knocking out her daughter's front teeth during a violent altercation in their Georgia home. News of the incident spread like wildfire. A soul legend being booked for assaulting her daughter? The headlines were brutal, and so was the speculation. But the story, as always, ran deeper than a mugshot. According to the police report and subsequent statements, the fight began over household responsibilities and disrespect. Angie claimed that Diamond, then 30 years old and living in her home, was being verbally abusive and combative. When things escalated, Angie picked up a metal stand in defense, allegedly intending to scare Diamond off. In the scuffle, the object struck Diamond in the face, causing serious dental damage. The moment wasn't just violent, it was symbolic. A mother and daughter locked in battle not just over chores or rules, but over years of emotional tension. Diamond, for her part, painted a picture of emotional neglect and resentment. She said Angie was often more invested in her career than her child, and that their relationship had been fractured long before the 2015 incident. In interviews after the arrest, Diamond described growing up in her mother's shadow, a shadow that didn't always feel safe. Fans were stunned. This was the same Angie Stone who had sung about love, forgiveness, family, and legacy. How could the woman behind songs like Brotha and No More Rain be caught up in such a painful family drama? But that's the thing about real life. It doesn't follow the lyrics. Angie eventually spoke out too. She didn't deny the incident but expressed heartbreak over how it was being portrayed. No mother wants to be in that situation with her child, she said in a BET interview. But sometimes love turns into pain, and pain turns into something you never meant. It was one of the few times Angie let the world see just how fragile things were behind the scenes. All the years of career disappointments, industry disrespect, and personal sacrifice seemed to culminate in that one moment, where mother and daughter, both wounded, lashed out at each other. The arrest was later dismissed, and Angie avoided jail time, but the scars emotionally and physically lingered. What made this feud different from others on the list is that it was never about competition or betrayal. It was about generational trauma, about the cost of fame, and about a mother and daughter trying to love each other through years of unhealed wounds. To this day, the relationship remains complicated. While Diamond has occasionally expressed hope for reconciliation, she's also been open about the therapy and distance she needed to process what happened. Among Angie Stone's most painful public fallouts wasn't with a rival or a label executive. It was with someone she once called Little Sis. Number 2. Selena Johnson. When she joined R&B Divas Atlanta in its second season, Angie envisioned herself as a peacemaker and mentor, a veteran offering guidance to a group of black women trying to navigate fame, family, and the pressures of an unforgiving music industry. But one relationship in particular with Selena Johnson slowly unraveled on screen, and it exposed just how fragile sisterhood can be when pride and pressure collide. Selena Johnson, best known for her raw vocals and soulful delivery on Kanye West's All Falls Down, had long been frustrated by the industry's tendency to overlook her. She wasn't a newcomer. She had paid her dues, just like Angie. But when Angie joined the show, she often assumed the role of big sister, not in a warm, collaborative way, but in a manner Selena and others felt bordered on controlling. The tensions simmered from the start. In one episode, the cast came together to discuss a unifying group song called One Voice. It was meant to be a healing anthem, something to showcase the talent and strength of the women involved. But creative differences quickly emerged. Angie had strong opinions about structure, direction, and message, and Selena, known for speaking her mind, pushed back. Selena later remarked in a post-show interview that it seemed as though she entered with the belief that she needed to instruct them. However, she emphasized that they were not merely students, they were artists as well. To viewers, it became clear that what Angie saw as nurturing, Selena interpreted as patronizing. And when the show's producers continued to pair them together for emotional story arcs, things only got worse. Whether it was a performance rehearsal, a group dinner, or a therapy circle, the two women could barely find common ground. Angie, for her part, seemed genuinely hurt by the resistance. In multiple confessionals, she said she felt misunderstood and shut down anytime she tried to offer wisdom. She spoke of coming into the show with a heart to help, but being met with defensiveness and ego. And while she never publicly blasted Selena by name, she would later describe the entire R&B Divas experience as toxic and spiritually draining. Behind the scenes, things weren't much better. Rumors swirled that producers were encouraging more drama between Angie and Selena to boost ratings. Some claimed Angie was frustrated that scenes showing her attempts at peacemaking were being edited out, leaving only the conflict. Whether that's true or not, the fallout was real. Angie nearly walked away from the show mid-season. Selena, meanwhile, told interviewers she felt Angie was living in the past and needed to respect everyone's journey. And just like that, two powerhouse vocalists who could have uplifted each other became symbols of how Black women in entertainment are often pitted against one another, even when their hearts are in the right place. There was no major blow-up, no screaming match, no final confrontation, but there was something even sadder: silence. The two stopped engaging. The warmth was gone, and fans who had once hoped for a collaboration were left watching a slow, cold drift between two women who clearly needed healing, not headline. In the end, Angie left the show with more scars than songs. And the loss of sisterhood with Selena Johnson? It wasn't just disappointing, it was another reminder that fame, ego, and reality TV often don't mix with genuine connection. Number 1. Luther Vandross. Of all the rumored tensions in Angie Stone's life, few have sparked as much quiet speculation as her brief professional association with the late, great Luther Vandross. Two titans of soul, two voices that could melt stone. And yet, behind the velvet curtains of one shared tour, the chemistry didn't quite sing. The rumors, never fully confirmed by Angie herself, began circulating among fans who followed both artists closely. According to whispers from the tour scene in the early 2000s, Angie Stone and Luther Vandross performed together during select dates of the BK Got Music Summer Soul Tour in 2002. While their pairing was a gift to R&B lovers, insiders suggest that what unfolded backstage was less than harmonious. The central allegation? Luther Vandross allegedly treated Angie Stone as an inferior act, despite her own established career and decades in the industry. It's been said, though not by Angie directly, that she was subjected to shortened sets, kept in the dark literally, with stage lights turned off during parts of her performance, and offered little support as an opening act. The implication was that Luther, famously a perfectionist and sometimes controlling in his productions, may have viewed Angie as a threat or simply didn't extend the respect due to a peer. But here's the key. Angie Stone has never publicly confirmed these claims. She's never disparaged Luther by name in an interview, never accused him directly, never aired grievances for the public to feast on. And in that silence, there's both grace and mystery. What we do know is that Angie has spoken in more general terms about being undervalued and undermined by men in the industry, especially men who had power and platforms long before she did. In multiple interviews, she's expressed how painful it was to be treated as less than even after years of contributing to the foundation of soul and hip-hop. Could this have applied to her experience with Luther Vandross? Possibly. After all, Luther, brilliant as he was known behind the scenes to be extremely particular about openers, staging, and spotlight control. And more than a few of his contemporaries have quietly admitted that touring with him meant checking your ego at the door. Still, it's worth asking, was this really a feud? Or was it one of those silent, one-sided stings where one artist feels disrespected and the other never even notices? If there was pain, Angie didn't weaponize it. She never used Luther's name as a punchline or scapegoat. She never diminished his legacy, even when hers was being diminished. Instead, she took the high road, the soul singer's road. She kept it moving, releasing album after album, earning Grammy nominations, and reminding the world that respect doesn't have to be granted for impact to be real. In the years since Luther's passing in 2005, Angie has occasionally mentioned her admiration for him, more often in reverent tones than bitter ones. And that's perhaps the final word on whatever tension may or may not have existed. It never stopped her from honoring his place in the music world.